Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Greg. Thank you to the entire LAGCOE staff for inviting me to be back with you again this year. Thank you to all of you in the room for taking part of your afternoon to hear my presentation about LNG and a bit of the story of what's happening with Cheniere Energy. It's wonderful to be back with this group. Before I start, I'll tell you a quick story. I would guess that by function of being in this room, most of you don't have a lot of Hollywood experience. Neither do I. I will say that this is what I enjoy doing. This is what I do quite a bit in my job. I spend a lot of time talking to groups, telling the story of Cheniere, talking about LNG exports and what's happening in our industry. But recently I got called upon to do something that took me outside that comfort zone. We were filming a promotional video for our Corpus Christi liquefaction facility that you'll see momentarily. See, we can do tours at our Louisiana facility. We have an import facility to show them. I'll tell you about that also. But in Corpus Christi, it's just a green field. So we did a promotional video with animation, and the idea was that I would stand in and I would show you this facility that was being animated behind me. So I had to go into a television studio that was entirely green screen. If you've ever seen the behind the scenes on a Hollywood movie, the entire room was green, lights, there was a crew, very much outside my comfort zone. But I learned something that day, and I learned something about Hollywood and why these actors and actresses, they have so many yes people around them that tell them how great they are. Because that day, as I stood there on the green screen with probably 11 or 12 crew members, tending to every detail of what was happening, the gentleman on the computer who was animating the actual facility behind me, with no particular consideration for my feelings, as I'm standing there nervous, hands trembling a bit, says to the entire room, "His hair's too damn thin. His hair's too damn thin. The facility's coming through his hair." So if you ever have the opportunity to see the promotional video for our Corpus Christi facility, you'll say, that guy has a little bit more hair than I remember at LAGCOE. They had to animate my hair so that the video didn't show through my thinning hairline. So I really like doing this a lot better than I like doing that, and I learned a little something about Hollywood that day. 2 years ago, this is my second time speaking to LAGCOE. I was here 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, when we convened in this very room, we convened in a very different environment. You all are well aware of that. West Texas Intermediate was at $106 that day. Words like layoffs, anxiety, bust, those weren't even on the horizon when we convened 2 years ago. In our particular part of the industry, there was actually a fairly robust public debate raging as to whether or not we should export this abundant supply of resources that we had realized we could develop in this country. A lot's changed in 2 years, but 2 years ago, I and many of the other industry speakers during that 3 days of LAGCOE 2013, we spoke of revolution. We spoke of it as a revolution that was won, and if you've heard any of us in the energy industry speak over the last few years, we all use that revolution term. There's really no other way to describe what's happened in our industry over the last decade. It was a revolution that was won in so many ways. It was won through American ingenuity and innovation, and the work of those of you in this room and your companies that you represent. Let's remember that it was just 2004, 11 years ago, that Alan Greenspan told a committee of Congress that the biggest challenge facing the U.S. economy, now remember, this is before the troubles of 2008, 2009, the biggest challenge facing the U.S. economy was a shortage of natural gas. That actually happened, and it always brings a chuckle from the room when you mention it. That was 11 years ago. What's happened in the meantime was certainly a revolution, and today, we still talk of revolution, a revolution that was won, that's resulted in an abundant supply of natural resources. I'm telling you what you already know, but an abundant supply of natural resources that we unlocked with horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing. And it's resulted in a paradigm shift. Back in 2004, we were very much, as Alan Greenspan was testifying to Congress, we were very much viewed as the poster child of global energy consumption. If you just think about the way we watched the nightly news in 2004 with an eye towards what was happening in the Middle East and its impact on our energy politics, things have changed. That paradigm shift, we've gone from being that poster child of global energy consumption to being poised, or some would say have already become, a global energy superpower. Now, the spoils of that revolution that we're all familiar with have been significant. Lower costs, record low costs to consumers, manufacturing opportunity, a renewed manufacturing opportunity that's often called, if you've heard the energy revolution, you've heard manufacturing renaissance just as many times. and the opportunity to export the hydrocarbons that we develop here in the United States, both natural gas and potentially oil. But today we all look at that revolution and we realize that the true story of a revolution isn't necessarily in the battle, isn't necessarily in the changing of guards, but it's in what comes after that. You know, the American Revolution gave birth to a great nation. The Industrial Revolution gave birth to a new way of life. And the Energy Revolution is going to bring things to us as an industry, to us as a country, both expected and unexpected in the decades to come. And as a global energy superpower, now that the revolution has been fought and won to a certain degree, we have to adjust to our new status. You know, the idea that other nations and groups of nations that have the ability to have an abundant supply of resources, that they would have public debates about whether or not to export it, seems foreign in other parts of the world. But that's been a growing pain for us to adjust to. We had the battle over natural gas exports. We continue to discuss the idea of oil exports. So we have to adjust to our new status, and the world has started to adjust as well, as we know. Anybody in here watch Breaking Bad? Familiar with the basic tenet of the show? Arguably, I think it's the best television show in history, but that's just my personal opinion. So I often get challenged by my staff to try to work in a quote from Breaking Bad, so this is going to be the Breaking Bad quote for today's speech. One of the henchmen who works for Walter White, the main character, he says, hang on, I got to get the quote right if I'm going to use the quote. Just because you shoot Jesse James, don't make you Jesse James. So the point being, just because we've emerged as this global energy superpower, we don't become OPEC overnight or operate in a vacuum. You know, we've seen the efforts recently of OPEC to protect and to take back their market share. We've seen the effects on global supply and pricing. And yes, this has created some pain and apprehension in our industry. But the story will continue to unfold. We will continue to innovate. We will continue to lower production costs. And we've become more nimble and able to react to changes in the industry. But there is no denying, as everyone in this room knows, there's no denying that these are challenging times for our industry. So in the backdrop of all this, I want to come here today to tell you about a positive story. A story that's still emerging, but a positive story that I would say, and we have certainly said, is really a once-in-a-generation story for our industry and our country in regards to energy politics. It really is the next chapter in that energy revolution. In fact, that's what my presentation is usually called, but 6 months ago they made me commit to a title, so I stuck with it, The American Energy Landscape. But it's usually called the next chapter in the American Energy Revolution. And that's LNG exports, of which most of you know, Cheniere has been on the forefront of moving us to exporting natural gas from this country. In the next few minutes, I'm going to review the case for American LNG exports, share the story, not in too much detail because many of you probably know the past story of Cheniere, but our upcoming plans for where we're going to go in the LNG export business. And then finally, I'm going to share with you a recent study of the economic impacts of just one of our projects, the Sabine Pass project, which will be shipping first LNG in January of 2016. You know, when we were here 2 years ago, and so long as I've been with Cheniere, we've been talking about LNG exports as if it was this foreign, this long, way off thing into the future. But in fact, we've introduced gas into the Sabine Pass plant as of 2 weeks ago. And we'll be producing LNG within the next couple months. We'll load the first ship for international markets in January. So it is an exciting story. And then finally, I will close by attempting to answer any of the questions you have. I was talking about this with my team, and I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of speeches in the last 4 years. By far, the toughest presentation I did was LAGCOE 2013, because those of you in this room know what you're talking about. So I will give every effort to answer your questions, but I am the director, senior director, actually. It does really not that big of a distinction, but I have been promoted recently. And I tell you that because everybody else who's presenting in this room is a president or a CEO, so I just wanted to boost myself up a bit. I will do my best to answer your questions. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint, but these presentations inevitably require some PowerPoint, so we will dive into some of those slides. Don't bother reading this one. This is the one the attorneys make me include. We all have them. We all have to deal with them. Attorneys, not wordy slides. The fact is, again, Senior Director of Government and Public Affairs. What this slide basically tells you in about 2,000 words is don't trade on anything you hear me say. If you trade on anything you hear me say, you need to leave here and go get another financial advisor. I'm the director of public affairs. Don't trade on what a public affairs guy ever tells you. Real quickly, I include this presentation in this slide in every presentation I've given over the last 4 years. Everyone in this room knows the material here. You know what LNG is. But for this audience, I really include this slide as a reminder of the burden or the responsibility on our industry in dealing with the public. You know, we throw terms like hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling and LNG around as if the rest of the world knows what we're talking about, and we are an industry that absolutely loves our acronyms. LNG is one of those spaces where you've got LNG, liquefied natural gas, NGLs, CNG. To the average person, and we talk to a lot of people around where these facilities are being built, there's a lot of confusion about the commodities that we're dealing with in this industry, and there's a lot of mystery around what hydraulic fracturing really is. So I include this just so you know that in the LNG industry, but in all your industries as well, that burden of education is a high one that we carry and we take very seriously. We talk about safety. We talk about the fact that in 150,000 voyages of LNG cargoes, there's never been an accident. We talk about the resiliency of the plants and the safety of the plants. I think you heard in my introduction, I worked for BP. I no longer speak in absolutes, however, from that experience in public affairs, because circa 2008, 2009, I used to say that blowout preventers absolutely could not fail. So I will never tell you in this presentation that something absolutely can't happen. I never tell an audience that something absolutely can't happen. But we talk about why natural gas, why LNG is a relatively safe commodity in the communities where we operate. Let's see if I can get rid of this, because you can see that, can't you? Tech experience, too. Not a lot of bar charts in this presentation. I tried to put more pictures, but this is an important one. This really is what I call the opportunity slide. This is the slide that shows you why why it makes good sense for us to export natural gas from this country. Real quickly, if you go out to the right, 2035, that is what we as a country, what various studies have shown we can produce per day, how much natural gas we can produce in this country. That little gray, or it looks on the screen as a light blue piece of pie going across the bars, that's what we can consume as a country. Now, the reason why it's a pie shape as opposed to a line, the bottom side of that is if we continue to consume natural gas in this country as we do today, without robust investment in transportation infrastructure, it continues to hold its current share of energy generation. The high side of that gray piece of pie is if we really start to invest in LNG as a fuel for transportation infrastructure. If we continue to see natural gas take market share of electricity generation, and it presumes a fairly significant carbon tax passed at the federal level. So that is the best case scenario for domestic usage of natural gas. And what you see to the far right, even under the most aggressive demand scenarios in the United States, we'll be able to produce 29 billion cubic feet a day more gas than we can consume in this country. This slide, I think, makes the argument for LNG exports. Now, exports aren't nearly the public policy football that they were 2 years ago when we spoke here, for a variety of reasons. But I still include this because I think it makes the most compelling case, and as I said, this is the opportunity slide. This is the flip side. This is demand. Now, we know with changes in what has changed in the energy markets that demand has come down a bit, but as you can see here, demand for LNG in the global marketplace is still quite significant. Particularly in Europe, where many of our cargoes are destined for. But both Asia and Europe will have significant LNG demand over the next 20 years. In fact, if you look at that demand, to meet that demand, a facility that's the size of our Corpus Christi facility needs to be built somewhere in the world each year. Every year from now out through, this is through 2025, but out through 2035 is what the projections have shown, a facility needs to be built every year. The Corpus Christi facility is our smaller facility, but one of those facilities needs to be built somewhere in the world. Now, the marketplace is agnostic in many ways as to where those facilities are built. That's one of the reasons why we, for the last several years, have been pushing to get approvals for these facilities in the United States. You know, if that gas comes from Australia, if that gas comes from the coast of Africa, if that gas comes from Canada, the folks who need that gas need that gas. Now, there are some advantages to U.S. natural gas, obviously, but the world marketplace is generally agnostic as to where that gas comes from, and that's why it's important for us to seize the opportunity of exports. Now, this is Cheniere's current LNG platform. Before I dive into this in too great a detail, I will take a moment just to remind you of Cheniere's story. We began in the late 90s actually developing offshore gas plays. Back when we thought there was a shortage of natural gas in this country, we were actually drilling for it offshore, trying to develop it. As a small company with limited resources, we quickly realized that was not the business for us to be in. We then moved to LNG imports and started to build a facility in 2004. I always throw that Alan Greenspan quote in at you so you remember that we weren't the only ones who got it wrong. But we built a facility on the coast of Louisiana at a cost of $1.6 billion. It opened in April of 2008, which those of you in this room do know that if you were going to pick the absolute worst, the perfect worst time to open an import facility on the coast of the United States Gulf Coast, it was April 2008, which is why our stock went from $40 to $1 overnight, literally, when we opened that facility. At $1.6 billion, we didn't just get it wrong. We built the largest import facility in the world on the US Gulf Coast in Louisiana. So for us as a company, it very much became adapt or die at that moment, and our chairman and board decided, many thought they were crazy at the time, but perhaps the abundant supply of natural resources that we've been blessed with in this country could create an opportunity to go the other way. Now, you all know the story from there. We embarked on exporting. We took that Sabine Pass facility, that $1.6 billion paperweight, as one of our vice presidents called it, and we have converted that facility into exporting. We began construction on an export facility at Sabine Pass in August of 2012, and again, in January, we'll deliver our first cargo into the world marketplace. So, the projects that you're most familiar with are here on the left, Sabine Pass liquefaction, which we'll talk about in more detail. That's going to have 27 million tons per year capacity of LNG exports. That equates to about 3.8, 3.9 billion cubic feet per day. Corpus Christi liquefaction below that, it's just outside Corpus Christi, Texas. We have permitted 3 trains at that, and if any of you aren't familiar with the LNG industry, a train is simply the gas processing plant that takes that gas from pipeline temperatures and cools it down to negative 260 degrees to make it into liquefied natural gas. We're building 3 trains at Corpus Christi that have been permitted. We've already announced an expansion of that facility. When fully built out, that'll be about 22.5 million tons per year, about 3.2 billion cubic feet of natural gas. We've also, projects that you may be less familiar with, the projects to the right, have entered into a relationship with Parallax Energy, where we are serving as a financial partner to them, and we will operate the Live Oak LNG and Louisiana LNG plants. These are much smaller plants, more moderately sized plants, but are part of our growth and diversifying as we move forward in the LNG business. Where we will end up, if we execute on all the projects that we have now, by 2025, we'll be exporting as a single company 60 million tons per year. That will be nearly 9 billion cubic feet of gas a day that will be passing out of the United States through a Cheniere facility. That will represent 14% of the total global LNG market, making us one of the largest exporters of LNG on a global basis. I think the most amazing number is that bottom left number, $50 billion in U.S. infrastructure investment, 1,000 permanent jobs created, supporting over 200,000 indirect jobs. So this is a significant growth story. When I tell you that this is a positive story happening in the backdrop of all that's happening in our industry, it truly is, and these numbers show it. Here's the Sabine Pass liquefaction facility. What you see in blue is that $1.6 billion facility that we built and opened in 2008. What you see in orange is what's currently permitted and under construction at the site. Trains 1 and 2, which are phase 1 of the project, are 95.2% complete. Trains 3 and 4 are about 76% complete at this point. So we have, for a project that is 20, and I buried the lead as I often do, this is a $20 billion project. To put that into perspective, $20 billion is arguably the largest single industrial investment in the history of the United States. The only project that contends for that title is the Alaska Pipeline, if you consider all of the well over 1,000 miles of pipeline, the various stations, the Valdez terminal. If you consider that all as one project and inflate it to today's dollars, that would exceed what we're spending. So this is arguably the most expensive industrial project in the history of the United States. Being built by Bechtel, again, I gave you the status update. Interestingly, we've already spent, at site, I just got the updated numbers this morning, we've spent almost $8.1 billion on the site already today. For any of you who, and I know I've got a couple friends from Cameron Parish here in the audience today, but for any of the rest of you who have the opportunity to drive down Highway 82 in Cameron Parish, and unless you have family there or really are dedicated to your duck hunting, you may not get down that way. But I can tell you it's a pretty amazing construction site. I joke with my friends in Cameron Parish that they have a skyline now. There are over 100 major cranes on the site. It genuinely looks like a small city. As of this morning, there were 4,925 workers on site involved in the construction of the facility. So I think we are at that number. I think if we haven't declared it yet, we are hitting peak construction at this point. We had always said peak construction would be about 4,500. We are nearing 5,000, and I'm not sure we have declared peak construction yet. We've started commissioning, obviously, on train 1, and that'll be the train that'll deliver the first cargo coming up in January. Now, I'm a transplant to this part of the country, but I learned very quickly that one of the good ways to communicate something is to put it into football terms. All of us in this room, all of us in this industry, we throw that billion-dollar word around like it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But the difference between $9 and $10 billion is a lot of money. And so one of the ways I've been able to put this together, I know everybody loves their football down in this part of the world. If, in Cameron Parish, we were to build the Superdome today, we could build 30 Superdomes for the cost of the Sabine Pass liquefaction plant. The investment in Corpus Christi is similar. So one company with about 700 employees, market cap of, I don't know what our market cap is, it's significantly less than it was, but that market cap, it's still a relatively small company. We are building the equivalency of about 60 Superdomes on the Gulf Coast right now. You build a football stadium and the eyes of the country are very much on you. While the average person on the street may not know what we're doing, certainly the eyes of the energy world are on these investments because they understand the scale of what's happening here on the U.S. Gulf Coast. Which adds to the point that it's going to be large. The infrastructure in place is very large. You can see down in the bottom left-hand, that's a F-150 pickup truck. What you're looking at here is one train and the associated infrastructure for one train. About 200 cooling fans, 15 feet wide, to put that into perspective. The LNG cold box, where the LNG is actually liquefied, weighs over 1,000 tons. In both of the places where we've developed these projects thus far, Corpus Christi and at Sabine Pass, we've enjoyed almost universal public support for these developments. We've been very aggressive in working to educate those around us. I will tell you that at Corpus Christi, we had one gentleman who had some concerns about property values and was trying to drum up some opposition among his neighbors and put out a flyer about the projects and their size. One of the things he said was that there were going to be 6 747 jet engines powering the facility. The idea being to try to scare his neighbors and make it sound like it was going to be LaGuardia Airport in their backyards. So I've gone around to many public meetings and said I have to set the record straight. What he said is absolutely untrue. It will be 24 747 jet engines powering the facility. Each one of the trains is actually powered by a GE LM2500 Plus turbine. Those turbines are the exact same turbines that hang on the back of a 747, off the wing of a 747 jet engine. It's a different configuration, but it's the same turbine that's on a 747. And so there will be quite a few. When we build out 5 trains, there'll be 30 at Corpus Christi, where the gentleman said there would be 6. But then I obviously start talking about acoustic containment and the regulations that the federal regulators put on us to not be a noise burden for our neighbors. So we talk, I don't just tell the joke, I tell them why it's not a concern and why there's not an airport in their backyard. Real quickly, you see some of the numbers in phase 1 of Sabine Pass liquefaction. Over 1 million linear feet of piping, 10 million linear feet of wire, 460 heat exchangers, 485 vessels, 25 million direct work hours. It is hard to really capture the full scope and size of the project. Now again, I hope some of you get an opportunity to drive by and see the site, because pictures don't really do it justice, but this is an idea, some of our more updated pictures of the construction site. and the various components of the facility at Sabine Pass. You can see here trains 1, 2, 3, and 4 with the various components populating. Up to the top of the picture, you'll see train 5. We have started soil work. Again, for those of you familiar with Cameron Parish, you will know that the term soil is a very generous. Pudding would probably be a bit more accurate. Significant soil work goes into place before we can even take heavy equipment onto the site. We have to also, on that subject, the facility that you see here, when it's fully built out, we will have driven 60,000 pilings into the ground. 60,000 concrete pilings, each going about 90 feet deep. If you laid them end to end, it would reach from Cameron Parish to Chicago. That's how much concrete we're putting into the ground underneath this facility to hold it in place. Now, what underpins our ability as a small company to be able to move forward on these projects has been the long-term contracts. This is not an industry where we're building and just hoping, living on a hope and a prayer that we're going to be able to sell the gas. In fact, 80% of the gas of our permitted facilities that we're currently building has already been sold into the global marketplace. It's been sold on a take-or-pay basis for the next 20 years. The price is tied to Henry Hub. I'll show you some terms of the contracts here for those of you who are interested. It provides destination flexibility to the customer. We, as Cheniere, go out and procure the gas for the customer. The SPAs are guaranteed by the parent companies of those who we contract with. We had, 2 years ago when I was here and we were still negotiating many of those long-term contracts, we had a long list of folks who were negotiating with us. We turned many away because when a company our size that's trying to build currently $34 billion worth of projects, ultimately $50 billion worth of projects, we needed strong financial guarantees. We needed the most creditworthy buyers in the world, and those are the folks who we've contracted with. Our price is set at Henry Hub plus a fixed fee, 15%. We charge our customers 115% of the Henry Hub price. We go out into the marketplace, we deliver the gas, we liquefy the gas, and we place it onto their vessel. So this is an example of, or this is a list of the agreements we currently have at Sabine Pass that have allowed us to finance these projects. You can see BG was our first major customer, BG, I guess soon to be Shell. Gas Natural Fenosa out of Spain, Kogas out of South Korea, Gale, state-run company out of India, Total, Centrica, all names that you're familiar with, all names that will be exporting gas from Sabine Pass in the coming months and years. Now, again, just to give you a real quick how the contract works, that 115%, the 15% is not a major profit center for us. For us, what has guaranteed our financial viability is the liquefaction fee. So if you commit to take X volume of natural gas, for every million BTU that you've committed to take, we're going to charge you a set fee. And at Sabine Pass, it varies depending on the risk associated with the contract, but anywhere from $2.50 to $3 per million BTU. Now, if the market were to change and U.S. natural gas were to go to a place that none of us foresee it going or see how it could, the customer could choose not to take that gas, but they're obligated for the liquefaction fee. That's why we've been able to find equity partners. That's why we've been able to find financing partners from banks and others. But yes, all of that gas guaranteed, all those contracts guaranteed for 20 years. The Corpus Christi liquefaction facility, we are now under construction on this facility as well. Began construction about 2 months ago. We've got about 1,000 acres on the La Quinta Ship Channel just outside Corpus Christi. This was originally permitted as a 3-train, 3-tank facility. We have already announced an expansion and are attempting to permit 2 additional trains at this facility. Again, capable of exporting about 3.2 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day. On the size of, one of the things I forgot to say earlier, each one of those tanks that you see, the tanks are one of the things that people are most familiar with in seeing one of these facilities. Each one of those tanks holds about 3.3 billion cubic feet of natural gas equivalent in its liquefied form. To put that into perspective, that's more gas than the state of Louisiana uses and consumes in a day. In Texas, it would take about 3.5 of those tanks, but that gives you an idea of how much energy is actually stored on site. And again, we have started to permit. We're in initial development phase of trains 4 and 5 at this facility. All told, we don't have a final price tag on this facility. The first 3 trains are $14.5 billion. Ultimately, while we don't have a final estimate, we think it'll be in the $20 billion range, could exceed $20 billion, which would then make this the largest industrial investment in the history of the United States. everything's got to be bigger in Texas, so I know they'll figure out how to make it $1 more than 20 billion. And again, to give you an idea of the customers who we have lined up on 20-year long-term contracts, Pertamina out of Indonesia, Endesa, Iberdrola, Gas Natural Fenosa out of Spain, Woodside Energy Trading out of Singapore, EDF out of France, and EDP out of Portugal. And I'm happy to answer, to the extent that I can, more questions on the contracts if those come up, but that tends to get into the weeds, and I try not to do that unless you have questions on it. Now, our business, as you know, LNG production, LNG platform, these LNG assets, the $50 billion of LNG assets that we're developing, obviously key. But when you're developing all that gas to those customers who I just showed you, you have to go out and procure that gas as well. We have built pipelines into each of our facilities, a 94-mile pipeline at Sabine Pass, a 23-mile line at Corpus Christi that have 7 interconnects each that allow us to access gas molecules really from around the entire country. In fact, much of the gas that we will be exporting, a significant percentage of the gas that we'll be exporting, will come out of the Marcellus Shale. Gas will come from here in Louisiana, will come from Texas, will come from Oklahoma. We have signed, well, I think that's my next slide, so I won't get ahead of myself. But then we've also, as I said, about 80% of our gas has been contracted through long-term sales and purchase agreements. Another significant part of our business is going to be the Cheniere marketing arm, where we'll be selling spot gas, and we'll be selling gas into the spot market as well, about 9 million tons per year anticipated for that. And we have chartered 3 vessels ourselves to operate as Cheniere, and then some future developments to diversify. On the gas procurement side, I said I had to have a gas procurement slide because I got a lot of questions on gas procurement that I was not prepared for 2 years ago. So for those of you who are planning to ask those questions, here's your slide. We are securing supply contracts on 1 to 7 year terms. We have signed contracts with virtually every major producer in the United States at this point. We have redundant pipeline capacity. We have over 4.2 billion cubic feet of capacity already for Sabine Pass, both through our pipeline and contractual arrangements to bring gas into our facility. 4.2 billion for a facility that won't be exporting nearly that. We're making sure that we have redundant pipeline capacity and supply. And again, much of that will be coming from Marcellus, Haynesville, Eagle Ford, Barnett, Permian Basin, and elsewhere. Now, one of the questions recently has been, with falling energy prices, excuse me, when they make you talk this long, it gets a little parched. One of the issues has been, can we survive? Obviously, the long-term contracts, when, sometimes folks who say, well, Cheniere can't survive or LNG exports can't survive in this low energy price environment don't understand the terms of our long-term contracts. But again, that accounts for about 80% of our existing business. A significant portion of our business will also be in the spot market. We have looked at what we can do as Cheniere Marketing, what the break-even price for us is, and you can see right here, $7.70 to $8.40. That's where we can still be competitive and break even if Asian prices drop to that point. So we still think there's room to run there. We still think there's opportunity for us to compete going forward in a lower cost energy environment. Yes, when LNG was going for $15 per million BTU or $17 per million BTU in Asia, that was a more attractive environment for us. But we still believe we're competitive and can make a profit on the spot basis with our projects as well. This shows you, I won't spend much time on this, but some of the implied margins both with Europe and Asian markets. At $7 gas, $7 LNG delivered in Europe, we have an implied margin of $2.50 operating through the Cheniere infrastructure. So what does all this mean? Obviously, we're investing a lot of money. We're creating a lot of jobs. We commissioned a study from Dr. Lauren Scott, former head of the economics department at Louisiana State, a very respected economist in this region who's done a lot of work for a variety of the industry, to just look at what this project would mean for Louisiana and the United States as a whole. These are just some of the headline numbers. It was a fairly extensive study. But the $20 billion construction that we're spending, $8 billion of which we've already spent, will expand just the construction phase that started in 2012, will end in 2020, is going to create $8.4 billion of secondary economic activity in Louisiana businesses. Over $3.3 billion in wages paid to Louisiana residents. An average of 6,391 jobs over the 8 years and 18,300 jobs during the peak construction year. What I think is more significant is operations. These projects are massive. There's no doubt about that. I've shown you the numbers. But when you're operating a $20 billion facility, your O&M budget tends to be fairly massive too. It tends to be larger than many capital projects In fact, 400 million plus from an operations and maintenance standpoint. That creates a significant amount of opportunity for contractors who are going to be helping us keep this facility operational. The operations alone, by 2019, will expand business sales by $2.9 billion, paying nearly $600 million in additional wages to Louisiana residents. When you look at the national numbers, and even I kind of go, how do they come up with these numbers? But they are significant, there's no doubt. And Dr. Scott's a lot smarter than me, so I'm going to quote him. Business sales in the United States, over $46 billion, over $16.8 billion paid to U.S. citizens. And operations as well, about $3.6 billion in business sales and $1.1 billion in earnings. Now, there are a number of contract opportunities when, again, that significant O&M budget that we have, for those service companies here and for those of you who know service companies that are interested, there are significant opportunities to work with us at Cheniere. A number of these have been contracted for the early phase of the project, but the Corpus Christi project and the further expansions, there are going to be significant contracting opportunities that exist from everything from electrical testing, bird control. Birds love the top of those tanks. That is actually a big issue in the LNG business, believe it or not. Chemical supply, ice delivery, helicopter service. We've got a lot of different things here. For those of you who are interested or know those who might be interested in contracting opportunities, on the construction side, Bechtel manages the construction of our projects, and we can share this information with you offline as well. But that bottom area, go to our website, follow up with me, and I can get you in touch with those who handle our contracts, that manage our contracts at Cheniere. Now, last time I was here in October of 2013, we took the opportunity to introduce something called our Energy Moment. Now, this was when we were very much in the throes of a debate about public policy around LNG exports. In many ways, that debate has been won, but our Energy Moment continues to exist. It's a clearinghouse of a lot of like-minded folks. Some of you in this room are members of that. Lobby, Lamoga, Loga, Knight Oil Tools, other companies represented here are members of that organization. It serves as a clearinghouse to educate stakeholders as to why LNG exports are important, why we don't want to turn our nose as a country to $50 billion worth of investment, why we don't want to turn away from the secondary business activity that this is going to create. We actually have a booth here today. We actually launched the organization at LAGCOE 2 years ago. It's a national organization that launched here 2 years ago. We have a booth here on the second floor, back in the corner. So if any of you would be interested in getting further information or lending your name to those efforts as we continue to move forward, we would love to have you. Finally, I'm doing all right on time. Finally, I'll conclude with that idea of revolution that I mentioned at the beginning that you've heard us all talk about so many times. There's a quote that I like on revolution. It's been attributed many different times in history. It apparently originated in the Russian Revolution. The quote is, there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. We are certainly at a time in the oil and gas industry where we are in those weeks where decades are happening. The ground is certainly moving beneath our feet, and we're all struggling to keep up. The fact is there are going to be bumps. We're in that next chapter of the revolution where we determine how we react, how the world reacts to us. But we are, at Cheniere and as part of the LNG export industry, very excited about the future for our industry, looking long term. We believe these projects represent a very positive story, and we're happy to work with all of you in this room to bring that to fruition. So thank you all for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to hear the questions, and I'll do my best to try to answer them. So thank you all very much. Well, either my, okay. Yeah.
What was the strategy behind Henry Hub pricing versus oil index pricing?
So that was really to capture the advantage that we had here in the U.S. with the abundant supply of gas that we have, with the historically low prices. I saw that gas had slipped below $2 again today. When we were signing our first SPAs, gas was below $2, while indexed prices in Europe were $12, in Asia approaching $20, on a given month. So the Henry Hub model was very attractive to those companies that were looking to sign long-term agreements, because based on everyone's study of the supply, including the federal government's study of our supplies, we're looking at a 100-year supply, depending on which study you look at. We're looking at a 100-year supply in this country. Global purchasers were confident that prices would stay low in the U.S. And so that arbitrage opportunity to take gas at Henry Hub versus the indexed prices in Europe and Asia. Now, obviously, those prices have come down somewhat, But as you can see, even at $7.70 in Asia, we still believe the Cheniere marketing arm can market gas into Asia with delivery costs and still be competitive at that point. Yeah.
So when a customer brings gas to you and you're going to liquefy it and you're going to put it on their ship, you're going to charge them 15% fee, is that right?
No, our customers, as we started to market the Sabine Pass facility a number of years ago, we were hearing from our customers that they didn't want to be in the business of procuring the gas. So we actually, Cheniere goes out, procures the gas. We have contracts for the supply. We go out and procure the gas through our pipeline and the 7 interconnects that we have. We buy that gas from the marketplace. We liquefy it. We load it onto your ship, and it becomes yours once it's loaded onto your ship and pulls away from our facility. So the customer simply pulls up. They're paying 15% for the transportation, for the procurement transportation of that gas. Then the liquefaction fee is what we charge to liquefy and load the ship.
And what is that fee for liquefaction?
At Sabine Pass, it ranges anywhere from about, I think it's $2.49 per million BTU to $3 per million BTU, and that was determined on the parties' risk that they assumed in the contracts. At Corpus Christi liquefaction, which was a greenfield facility, we didn't have all that $1.6 billion of infrastructure sitting there. The cost, the economics were a bit different. There, it's been $3 across the board. Our contracts have been, $3.50. $3.50 across the board per million BTU.
What effect would your new investors within Cheniere have had on any of your financial decisions, meaning the Icon?
As you know, Carl Icahn purchased a significant portion, 12, don't quote me on that. I see a couple, I don't know the exact percentage. It's in the 10 to 12% range on stock in the company. He has 2 members of his group have now taken seats on the board. We've seen no significant change in strategy thus far. I'm sure he will be an active participant in the board. But right now, we still continue to move forward with the facilities. Both the 2 major facilities are under construction. The Parallax arrangement has been announced and is in the public domain at this point. So we continue to diversify within the LNG business and look at other parts of the hydrocarbon business to be a part of. Thus far, no significant effects that we've seen.
At CERAWeek in February, your CEO talked about micro-LNG. Is that still part of your strategy?
That's one of those questions that I'm going to have to punt on and say is above my pay grade. I am not going to, I know a little bit, but since you're quoting our CEO, I'm not going to take the risk of getting cross with him. So I will have to punt on that and take your business card and get back to you on that. Well, either my presentation was better this time or you all just came with fewer questions today, because it was brutal last time. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Compared to 2 years ago with imports versus now exports and the regulatory hurdles back then versus today, has there been any change in type of hurdles you're having to deal with in the current environment?
So yes, there have been some changes. I'm not going to go so far as to say nice things about the regulatory process because that just wouldn't be fitting. But no, there have been some changes. So, and I didn't include the slide on the regulatory fight because it's not as much of a fight anymore, but the process to get one of these facilities permitted, you have to get a license from the Department of Energy to actually export the molecules of gas. The Department of Energy has to give you that license. If it's to a country with which we have a free trade agreement, it's basically a rubber stamp process. They almost have to give you that license. So a number of companies that have announced projects have paid a nominal fee and have received a license to export to countries with which we have a free trade agreement. The problem with that is nearly every country that wants LNG from the United States, we do not have a free trade agreement with. So the non-FTA process is far more extensive and was politicized a bit, became a challenge. There have been some significant improvements in that process so that only the companies that have received their FERC approval, which is the other agency that gives us the permission to site, operate, and build these facilities, once you've received that, and it's not a nominal fee there, simply to make the application, to make a fully completed application to FERC costs about $100 million. For the design work that goes into that, you invest about $100 million simply to hit send on that application. Once you've gone through that process, once you've been approved by FERC, then the Department of Energy looks at you. What you had in the previous process is anyone who had formed an LLC, put together a press release and said they were starting an LNG facility, paid a very nominal fee. was in line ahead of our Corpus Christi facility, for example, when we had a contractor ready to go and 20-year customers lined up. So the process has improved significantly. The FERC process is a fair process. It's a time-consuming process, but we all want to do these in a way that is responsible to our neighbors, is safe, environmentally sound. So the FERC process, while timely, is an okay process. The DOE process has improved significantly. Anything else? Yeah.
Do you have any sort of state regulatory obligations here?
So there are a number of, or what's the total number, 40 or 100? We've got to get about 40 major permits, both state, federal, before we can build one of these facilities. About 40 permits. A number of those are state permits. The air permit that goes through the state. There are a number of permits. The FERC is the umbrella agency that kind of oversees all of the federal piece of that, but we do have a number of state permitting pieces as well. The state of Louisiana, I can say, and really the state of Texas as well, have been a real pleasure to work through. Our colleagues in the industry who are trying to permit facilities and build facilities in Maryland find it to be a bit more challenging. There are other parts of the country that aren't as hospitable to the oil and gas industry, as you know. But no, in Louisiana and Texas, the state agencies have been a real pleasure to work with. All right. Well, thank you all for your time. I think I got you out of here a little bit early. Thanks.